I was beaten, I was raped, I was bound and gagged and left for dead. And the story just seized the headlines because that night, over 30 teenagers were roaming the park, what they called wilding. And 8 other people in the park that night were accosted or threatened in some way. And that story just grabbed the headlines, not only right there in New York City, but all over the world, as people really did contemplate what the savagery of the attack said about our society. Now, miraculously and thankfully, I did survive. And as the video said, my story is not about anger or fear or hatred or being a victim. My message is one of hope and possibility, of finding resilience. Now, of course, I pray that no one else suffers what I went through. But each one of us as spouses or partners or parents or siblings or business colleagues or friends at some point may face challenges from which we doubt we'll ever recover. We'll be knocked off our path. And what I've learned is useful for those times. 3 lessons that I learned during my recovery enabled me to tap in to my own resilience and overcome my greatest challenges. And those lessons are, first, the importance of support. Second, to be proud of what you can do rather than focus on what you can't. And then third, the power of the present moment. Now, before I elaborate on those 3 lessons, let me tell you a little bit more about the condition that I was in that started me on this journey. And, as a result of that severe beating to my head that April in 1989, I suffered a traumatic brain injury that left me with extensive physical and cognitive dysfunction. After I was finally found in the park and brought to the emergency department, my temperature was 85 degrees, hypothermic. And my blood pressure, we normally think of as 120/80, was 70 systolic, that first number, and there was no hearing or feeling of the diastolic rhythm, that second number. My left eye socket had been crushed in, and the force of the blow was so strong that doctors later told me that my eyeball exploded right through the thin plates of my orbital floor. And I had several skull fractures and deep lacerations and avulsions across my face. So from all this, I lost almost 75 to 80% of my blood, so I nearly bled to death. I was in a state of profound shock, called Class 4 hemorrhagic shock, and I was given last rites. I was also in a deep, deep coma for 2 weeks. And on something doctors use to measure the level of a coma, called the Glasgow Coma Scale of 15 points, I was given 4 points. And as a frame of reference, on that scale of 15 points, the higher, the better. So they give you 3 points just for being alive. Now, as a result of the brain injury, I have absolutely no memory of any of the events from the night of the attack until just about 6 weeks later. So I don't remember going running, the attack, being raped, or most of the time in the acute care hospital in New York City Metropolitan. So the first lesson I learned from being in this horrendous condition is the importance of support. I'm an ordinary person who had something extraordinary happen. And it was extraordinary in 2 ways. I suffered an extraordinary level of violence, but I also experienced an extraordinary level of human kindness and love, an outpouring of support that was crucial to my recovery. And some of that support came from strangers. When I was, first in Metropolitan Hospital, thankfully my family and close friends were with me through the entire ordeal. But people from all over the world sent me cards and letters and even some gifts. Children would send poems to me, and some people sent healing oil and holy water, and there was a makeshift memorial put up in Central Park where people put flowers and notes, and I did get 18 roses from Frank Sinatra. Now, I'm not sure if I remember that or I remember being told that, but what I'd like to do is read a short passage from the book that talks about the effect of all of this on me. As for the cards, letters, phone messages, and presents, my family read and described them to me even when I was comatose. Pat Babb, who is one of my nurses, when she held me in her arms, whispered of the support and told me of the gifts from around the world sent to comfort me and help me get better. Did I subliminally understand their words and gain strength from that unconscious knowledge? I'm sure of it, just as I'm convinced that the cards and letters I eventually could read and understand were a vital factor in my rehabilitation. Now, of course, no recovery was possible without the enormous skill of the medical staff. But was there more? Did I have thousands of friends working on my behalf? And I was hearing something else as well from the letters and cards, that I shouldn't be ashamed. A common reaction among rape survivors is self-blame. It's somehow my fault, the survivor imagines, and the internalization of that belief leads to shame, self-doubt, and silence. Some survivors feel they must hide that they were raped, so the attacks go unreported. Well, secrecy was impossible for me. The whole world knew I had been raped. But to me, this was a benefit. You shouldn't be ashamed, the messages were saying. We're ashamed at how you were treated. People didn't ostracize me because I'd been raped. Rather, they opened their hearts to me. And it was so important for me to hear that message. And, it continued. Months after the attack, in November of 1989, a man ran the New York City Marathon in my honor. And I learned later that he hadn't run the race in 6 years, but he decided to do it for me. And on the day after the race, the New York City Marathon is always run on the first Sunday in November. So on that following Monday, he Federal Expressed the medal he received crossing the finish line up to me at Gaylord Hospital in Connecticut, where I was for rehabilitation. And with the medal came a note that said, "This is for you as you come closer to finishing your own marathon." And I brought that medal with me. This is from the 1989 New York City Marathon. And for him to send this to me that represents not just the day of the marathon, so for any of you runners out there, that's a pretty huge event, but also the weeks and the months of training and sacrifice just meant so, so much to me. So I hold this medal so close to my heart. And thank you. And another example of support that was crucial to my recovery came from Mount Sinai Hospital's Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, or SAVI. And SAVI serves 9 hospital emergency departments in New York City, providing immediate counseling and advocacy to those who have been sexually assaulted. Now, when I was first at Metropolitan Hospital, one of the hospitals that SAVI serves, I was initially in a coma and then in various stages of delirium. So I was in no condition to receive the counseling or advocacy that SAVI provides. But SAVI did work with my family. The attack on me was also an attack on them, for my suffering had a ripple effect that sent waves of hurt to them as well. I mean, they had to deal with the overwhelming emotion of having a daughter, a sister, a niece who had been raped and who had suffered this brutal violence. But the support of SAVI helped my family come to terms with the crisis, and that enabled them to support me. One of my brothers, sometime after I was out of the hospital, wrote a letter to the director of SAVI, and I'd just love to read a couple of the lines that he wrote. And he said, "To whatever extent Trisha's recovery can be linked to the support she received from family and friends, that support would not have been nearly as strong or as focused without the tireless help of SAVI. Thank you," he said. "You helped Trisha and those who love her survive." And I think, to me, this says it all about what an organization like SAVI, like the YWCA of Clark County, can and does do. And after I was out of the rehab hospital and I had returned to New York City, I then, felt the support from SAVI directly through counseling programs. So all of these messages of support were confirmation for me that I wasn't alone, that I had done nothing wrong, that I wasn't to blame. All of these messages gave me hope. The second lesson that I'd like to share with you that helped me to, reclaim my life was learning to be proud of what I could do rather than focus on what I couldn't. And one of the most memorable days during my 5 months at Gaylord in Connecticut was when I went running again for the first time after the attack. Just a couple of weeks after I'd started to walk on my own without using a wheelchair, Nelson Carvalho, the director of the physical therapy program, sort of what I thought casually asked me if I wanted to join a group of people who met on Saturday mornings to run. Now, at first I wasn't sure if I wanted to join them, but I trusted Nelson, and I thought, well, if he's there, then it'll be all right. So one morning I decided to join them. And, and I realize now in hindsight that both Nelson and my physical therapist knew just how much to push me. It wasn't a casual request. It was part of the treatment plan that they had. But anyway, it turns out that at Achilles, an organization called Achilles met there on Saturday mornings. And Achilles is a worldwide organization that encourages people with all kinds of disabilities and challenges to participate in running. And as I said, one morning I decided to join them. And there were 4 or 5 of us there that day. There was a man in a wheelchair, and a couple people were on crutches, and there was a younger man with spina bifida. And I remember thinking to myself, if they can do this with their challenges, then so can I.